My name is Lenora Whitfield. I'm 62, widowed, and for as long as I can remember, I've defined myself by the needs of my family. I'm the quiet one, the one who stays in the background, making sure everyone else has what they need while my own ambitions wait patiently on the shelf. Tonight, though, I walked into the grand ballroom of Charleston's historic Wentworth Mansion with a lump in my throat and a careful straightening of my navy blue coat. The room gleamed under soft string lights, golden balloons swaying gently above the long tables draped in ivory linens. A string quartet played upbeat classical tunes, and photographers moved gracefully among the guests, capturing every smile, every hug. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with the warmth of polished wood, creating an atmosphere so refined it almost felt unreal. I spotted Marissa before she saw me, radiant in a sapphire dress, laughing with her friends and greeting her mother-in-law with that practiced warmth that drew admiring glances. My own presence seemed to shrink with every smile she offered someone else, every nod that skipped me when her eyes finally swept the room. I forced a gentle smile, and she returned only the faintest acknowledgement, a polite tilt of the head. Distant, almost perfunctory. I paused near the edge of the room, adjusting the strap of my handbag, my chest tight. I've spent years sacrificing, waiting for moments like this: birthdays, graduations, simple family dinners, hoping she might notice, might care, might say thank you. I whispered under my breath as I smoothed the folds of my coat. Maybe tonight, she'll see me for once. As Marissa's laughter carried across the room and the first toasts began, I realized I had no choice but to step closer, to witness what would unfold, heart bracing for what was coming next. Marissa stepped onto the small stage, her sapphire dress catching the soft light, and a confident smile playing on her lips. I felt the room tilt slightly around me, the chatter dimming as every eye turned toward her. She took the microphone in hand, her laughter ringing clear and practiced. The first words she spoke were not for me. She reached out, embracing her mother-in-law in a warm, deliberate hug, lifting the older woman from her seat. "She's the only mother that matters to me," Marissa said, her voice loud and measured, carrying across the room like a hammer striking stone. The crowd erupted in applause, and I could hear the clicks of cameras and the hum of admiration. I froze. My chest tightened as if the air itself had been pressed from my lungs. I felt invisible, erased, all the sacrifices. The late nights, the countless meals cooked and tears wiped away, none of it mattered here, in this glittering room filled with family and friends. Then she turned. Her eyes met mine, but there was no warmth, no recognition, only a cold, practiced detachment. "You can leave now," she said, her voice firm, deliberate, final. The murmurs of the guests shifted uneasily. Some looked down, some glanced at each other, as though unsure where to direct their sympathy or whether they should intervene at all. I gripped my handbag so tightly that my knuckles ached, and my heart thumped in a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. I had no words. I could only stand there, feeling the sharp sting of rejection press into me from every angle. For a moment, I questioned everything: the years of devotion, the countless evenings I stayed awake when she was sick, the times I silenced myself to avoid embarrassment for her. Did any of it exist at all in her eyes? Did I exist at all to her? I whispered under my breath, the words lost in the room's polite applause and clinking glasses. I took a slow, unsteady step forward, forcing my shoulders to square. The room felt impossibly large, the spotlight unforgiving. My hands trembled slightly around the strap of my bag. but I kept my gaze ahead. Whatever came next, I would face it. I stepped aside from the crowd, letting Marissa's voice fade into the clinking glasses and murmurs around me. My mind, restless and aching, drifted back through the years, tracing every small sacrifice that had built the foundation of her life. Sleepless nights spent holding her when a fever refused to break. Long hours standing at the stove preparing meals I barely tasted myself. The constant tug of war between supporting her and supporting her father's distant authority. I had put my ambitions on hold countless times, each deferred dream quietly stacking like bricks I carried alone. I remembered the first time I saw the seeds of her alignment with him and later with her mother-in-law. At 12, I had made her favorite dinner after a difficult exam, hoping to ease her disappointment. She looked at the plate, then up at me, and said with a shrug, "Dad says you cook badly." The sting cut deeper than any harsh word I'd spoken. It was a moment I carried quietly, filing it with all the other dismissals that had gone unspoken. Graduations were no different. At each ceremony, I tried to step forward, to place a hand on her shoulder, or share a quiet word of pride. She drifted toward her father, his approval seeming to outweigh everything I had ever given. Later, when she met Emily, my daughter-in-law, I watched her shift again, drawn to the warmth, the confidence, the polished charm that I had never learned to show so theatrically. Slowly, invisibly, I felt myself receding, becoming background scenery in the narrative of her life. I grieved quietly, acknowledging that my efforts, my love, my sleepless devotion had been swallowed by indifference. I felt sorrow, yes, but also a simmering frustration. How could so much care be invisible? How had my presence been replaced with another? The weight of decades pressed down, a mixture of empathy for the child I raised and grief for the mother I had been. Yet in that sorrow, I began to understand. The root of her behavior was not just rebellion or ingratitude. It was cultivated over years, shaped by others' voices and my own silences, and in that understanding, a new clarity began to take hold. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, my hands lightly clutching my handbag, trying to steady the rapid beat of my heart. The chatter and laughter from the party seemed distant now, a muffled soundtrack to the sharp ache in my chest. Marissa's laughter and the clinking glasses blurred together, leaving only the hollow echo of her dismissal. Then I noticed her Emily, my daughter-in-law, standing across the room. She had been quietly observing the scene, her expression carefully composed, but with something taut in her posture that I couldn't quite read for a moment. She seemed frozen, measuring the weight of the room, the social expectations, and the awkward tension that had swallowed me whole without warning. She moved. Emily rose from her chair, walking with deliberate steps toward the stage. The room seemed to exhale, a hush falling over the gathered guests. Cameras clicked quietly, and all eyes shifted to her movement. I felt a small spark of hope flare in my chest. She reached the stage, straightened, and took the microphone from its stand. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the fear she tried to conceal, but the determination in her eyes was unmistakable. She paused, scanning the faces around her before speaking, her voice firm despite the quiver. "I cannot stay silent any longer," she said, and the room held its breath. I felt the weight of her words settle over me like a shield. For the first time tonight, someone had chosen to stand not beside Marissa, but beside me. The tension in the air was almost tangible, a mixture of anticipation, disbelief, and quiet excitement. My chest lifted, my posture straightened, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps this night would unfold differently than I had feared. Emily's eyes met mine for a brief, steadying moment before she turned to the audience, her voice carrying over the sudden hush of the room. The mother who raised you, cared for you, and sacrificed everything is standing here, while you dismiss her as if she were nothing, she said, her words deliberate, each syllable sharp, yet controlled. A ripple passed through the crowd. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Guests who had been applauding Marissa moments ago now shifted their attention toward me. For the first time all evening, I felt seen not as a background figure or a footnote in my own daughter's life, but as someone whose years of effort, worry, and care had mattered. Marissa's composure faltered. Her smile tightened, and she glanced toward the guests, as if searching for allies who might rescue her from the sudden spotlight. But the attention had already moved, pulled toward the truth Emily had so courageously spoken. The room no longer admired Marissa's elegance or charm. It recognized the absence, the invisible labor, the years of quiet devotion that had been ignored. Emily's voice softened, yet remained firm. You have ignored her presence, dismissed her guidance, and replaced her with another. She was the one who stayed up through your fevers, who celebrated your small victories, who put her own life on hold so that yours could flourish. And now, here she stands, facing the dismissal you've handed her, with grace and dignity intact. I felt warmth rise through me, a trembling mixture of relief and validation. My shoulders loosened, the tightness in my chest easing slightly. Every unfair word, every overlooked effort, every quiet heartbreak I had endured suddenly felt acknowledged. The sting of rejection did not vanish, but it was tempered by this unexpected support. For the first time in decades, I understood that my sacrifices had not gone entirely unseen. A quiet pride began to bloom, a reassurance that even in the face of indifference, the truth of my love and devotion could not be erased. After the initial shock of Emily's words, I stepped back from the center of the room, letting the murmurs and the soft hum of the string quartet wash over me. The applause that had followed her declaration faded into the background, and in that quiet, I found space to think. For decades, I had stayed silent. I had swallowed my disappointments, ignored the subtle erasures, and allowed the life I had built to be overshadowed by others' perceptions. Tonight had made me realize how much that silence had cost me, not just in recognition, but in dignity. I began to observe, carefully, almost imperceptibly. Marissa's eyes darted around the room, searching for validation, while Emily stood with a calm determination that had unsettled her. Their interaction revealed subtle cues: Marissa's reliance on her mother-in-law for guidance, Emily's willingness to challenge it. Patterns emerged, small but significant, each one a thread I could later follow. A quiet resolve began to solidify within me. I would no longer remain invisible. Every gesture I had overlooked, every word I had left unsaid, had brought me here to this point where truth could finally assert itself. But I could not act rashly. The stakes were too high, and the dynamics of the room too fragile. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the memories of years of quiet labor, patient guidance, and unacknowledged devotion anchor me. I cannot be invisible anymore. I must act. But carefully, I thought, the words steadying the trembling in my hands. My mind began forming a careful strategy, noting who could influence the outcome, what evidence existed in the shadows of our family history, and how each small decision might shift the balance of power. The party continued around me, laughter and clinking glasses filling the corners of the room, but I was already elsewhere in the calm. Precise architecture of a plan that would ensure my voice was finally heard. The next morning, I returned to the quiet of my home. The city of Charleston still wrapped in a soft morning haze. The party from last night lingered in my mind, and with it, a renewed determination I had spent decades holding back, swallowing my voice, and now it was time to uncover what had always been within reach. I went to the study, a room filled with the faint scent of old paper and polished oak. The shelves were lined with folders and boxes my late husband had left, untouched and largely forgotten. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the first stack. Dust motes dancing in the shafts of morning light. Contracts, bank statements, investment records all meticulously cataloged, yet somehow hidden in plain sight. Hours passed as I sifted through the papers, connecting names, signatures, and transactions. Small patterns emerged. Funds had been moved, investments redirected, and decisions made that had disproportionately favored Marissa and her mother-in-law. The realization hit me like a jolt. The advantages they had enjoyed were not accidents. They had built themselves on the labor and trust I had provided silently. And now, for the first time, I could see the full extent. I took the documents to Henry, an old friend and retired lawyer who had always respected my judgment. He examined the papers with careful eyes. Nodding as he confirmed what I suspected, "Lenora," he said finally, "these could change everything. You have legal and financial grounds here, enough to confront them if you proceed wisely." Even as I felt a surge of empowerment, caution kept me grounded. A misplaced folder could be discovered. A visitor in the house, an offhand glance, or an accidental mention could ruin everything before I had the chance to act. Each careful step was deliberate, measured, a dance between risk and opportunity. I leaned back, letting the weight of the evidence settle around me. Years of being overlooked and dismissed had brought me to this moment. The quiet tension was almost unbearable, but so was the anticipation. I could feel the possibility of justice, finally within reach, stirring beneath the surface. The day of the family gathering arrived with a tense quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. I carried the folder carefully under my arm, each step deliberate as I walked into the familiar Charleston estate, now buzzing with conversations and laughter that seemed unusually sharp. Brittle with expectation, Marissa flitted about, checking decorations and greeting guests, her mother-in-law at her side, radiating that same confident charm that had overshadowed me for years. I waited until the room had settled, the chatter dipping to polite murmurs, and then stepped forward, placing the folder on the polished mahogany table in front of everyone. The room grew silent almost instantly, a palpable hush spreading from the corners to the center. I opened the folder, letting the documents spread naturally across the table, as if they were evidence waiting to breathe. I've stayed silent for decades. I began, my voice steady, carrying across the room without tremor. Today, the truth speaks louder than your pride. All eyes turned toward me. Marissa's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne glass. Her mother-in-law's perfectly composed expression twitched imperceptibly, betraying a flicker of anxiety. The silence stretched, a taut thread waiting to snap. I gestured to the documents, contracts, transfers, and agreements that have been carefully hidden for years. Decisions made that enriched certain members of this family at the expense of others, decisions that ignored honesty, fairness, and the sacrifices made silently. Day after day, guests leaned forward, murmurs of disbelief rippling through the room. Faces turned, eyebrows raised, whispers spread. Cameras discreetly captured every reaction. But no lens could hide the stark truth The foundations of Marissa's and her mother-in-law's impeccable facade were cracking. "You have benefited from manipulation and silence," I continued, eyes meeting theirs calmly. "But these papers show that your choices have consequences, and I will no longer be invisible." Marissa's lips parted, a protest dying in her throat as guests exchanged glances, shock written on every face. Her mother-in-law straightened, lips pressed into a thin line, but the tremor in her hands betrayed the careful veneer. The room had shifted. The crowd was no longer silent in admiration of perfection. It now recognized integrity, courage, and the weight of unacknowledged labor. In that moment, I felt a deep calm settle over me. A quiet triumph mingled with catharsis. I had reclaimed not only my voice but my dignity. I stepped back, letting the evidence speak for itself, each page a testament to truth finally prevailing over pride and deception. After the confrontation, the house felt quieter, almost reverent, as if it, too, acknowledged the shift that had taken place. I carried the folder back to my study, each page still holding the weight of truth. Sitting at my desk, I began to organize the next steps carefully, mapping out what had to be decided. The inheritance, once a source of unspoken tension, now became a tool for clarity and justice. Marissa would be excluded, not in anger, not in spite, but in acknowledgement of the years she had dismissed, overlooked, and replaced me. Emily, however, would be recognized not for material gain, but for courage, for speaking truth when everyone else stayed silent. The remainder, I decided, would go to causes that mattered: children without homes, women who had been silenced, a legacy that extended beyond personal grievances. Each decision felt deliberate, like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been diminished over decades. The old unease, the tightness in my chest that had accompanied family gatherings for so long, eased slightly. For the first time in years, I felt the tangible sense of control over my life and my legacy. I imagined the upcoming conversations tempered by respect, boundaries clearly drawn. No longer would I be invisible, manipulated, or silenced. These plans were not about punishment. They were about restoring balance, asserting dignity, and ensuring the next chapters of life unfolded with fairness. I leaned back in my chair, the afternoon sunlight spilling across the desk, illuminating the documents and contracts that now symbolized my authority. A quiet satisfaction settled over me, heavier and more enduring than any fleeting approval I had ever sought. The mornings in Charleston had begun to feel like mine again. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of my townhouse, dust motes drifting lazily in the golden glow, and I moved through the quiet space with a calm that had been foreign for years. Each day, I took time for small rituals I had once set aside, brewing coffee slowly, walking along the cobblestone streets of the historic district, greeting shopkeepers by name, and allowing myself to linger over the flowers spilling from window boxes. I had begun volunteering at a local women's center, guiding and mentoring those who had been silenced or overlooked, offering advice and encouragement in the same way I had once given to my own children, without expectation, without judgment. There was a quiet joy in seeing the impact of my efforts, the way someone's eyes brightened when they felt heard or understood. The satisfaction was different now. It was grounded in choice, not obligation. Friends who had drifted away during years of family tension returned gently, welcomed by my presence rather than tethered to someone else's agenda. Evenings were spent with books I had once shelved, recipes I had never tried, and the occasional spontaneous visit to a gallery or cafe. Each small pleasure a reminder that life could be simple, intentional, and mine. Occasionally, I would glance at the letters and contracts neatly stored on my desk, symbols of the careful decisions I had made in reclaiming my legacy. Seeing the tangible results of those choices, the charitable foundation flourishing, the support reaching the women and children who needed it, filled me with quiet pride. I had discovered that empowerment did not require confrontation every day. It required presence, consistency, and a willingness to honor myself. At night, when the city lights twinkled across the rooftops and the hum of Charleston drifted through the open window, I allowed myself a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades lift. I was no longer invisible. I had a voice, a life, and a legacy that reflected my values, my care, and my determination. I stood in the soft glow, looking at the streets I had walked countless times, and smiled. My life belongs to me. And for the first time in a very long while, I believed it.